The fist connected with Clara Thornton's jaw, just as the sun reached its brutal peak over South Pass City, Wyoming, and she tasted blood for the second time that sweltering August afternoon in 1876. She had known this beating was coming the moment she stepped between Bernard Hutchins and the trembling saloon girl he had cornered behind the general store, her worn dress torn at the shoulder and tears streaming down her painted face. Clara had not hesitated, had not considered the consequences when she grabbed Bernard's thick arm and pulled him away from the terrified woman. The girl could not have been more than 19, barely old enough to be working in such an establishment, and the desperation in her eyes had ignited something fierce in Clara's chest that made interference the only possible choice. Bernard had turned on her with the rage of a man unaccustomed to being challenged, especially by a woman. His first blow had caught her across the cheek, sending her stumbling against the rough wooden wall of the store. The saloon girl had fled, her footsteps disappearing into the dusty streets, and Clara had been left alone with a man twice her size and fueled by whiskey and wounded pride. "You should have minded your own business," Bernard snarled, advancing on her with his meaty fists clenched. Clara tried to stand straight, though her legs felt unsteady and her vision swam slightly. She was 22 years old, a seamstress who had come to South Pass City 3 years ago after her parents died of fever back in Missouri, and she had learned quickly that this mining town demanded resilience from anyone who wanted to survive. But resilience and survival were two different things when facing down a man determined to teach her a lesson about her place. She raised her hands in a futile attempt to protect herself as Bernard drew back his arm for another strike. The sun burned down mercilessly, and the air smelled of dust and horse manure and the distant scent of pine from the mountains that ringed the town. Clara could hear the sounds of South Pass City continuing around them, indifferent to her predicament, the clanging of the blacksmith's hammer, the rumble of wagon wheels, the laughter from one of the saloons on Main Street. No one would help her. This was simply how things were. Bernard's fist was already moving toward her face when a hand shot out and caught his wrist the mid-swing. The motion was so sudden and so forceful that Bernard actually stumbled, his eyes widening in shock as he was pulled backward and spun around to face a man who had appeared as if from nowhere. "Enough," the stranger said, and his voice was quiet but carried the weight of absolute authority. Clara blinked through the haze of pain, trying to focus on her unexpected savior. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of a man who spent his days in the saddle. His hat was dusty brown, pulled low over his eyes, but she could see the hard line of his jaw and the way he stood perfectly balanced, ready for whatever came next. His clothes marked him as a cowboy, worn denim trousers, leather chaps, a faded blue shirt, and a gun belt slung low on his hips with the easy familiarity of someone who knew how to use what he carried. "This is none of your concern, stranger," Bernard growled, trying to yank his arm free. The cowboy did not release him. "I am making it my concern," the cowboy replied. His voice had a slight drawl, soft around the edges but steel underneath. "You do not hit women, not in front of me, not ever." "That woman interfered with my business," Bernard protested, his face reddening with anger and embarrassment at being handled so easily. "She needs to learn her place." "Her place is not on the receiving end of your fists," the cowboy said, and now there was an edge to his words that made even Bernard pause. "You have two choices. You can walk away right now, and we will forget this happened, or you can insist on continuing this, and I will make sure you regret it. Choose wisely." Clara watched as Bernard's face went through several expressions, rage and calculation, and finally reluctant acceptance of reality. The cowboy was younger than Bernard by at least a decade, probably no more than 25 or 26. But there was something about him that suggested crossing him would be a terrible mistake. After a long moment, Bernard jerked his arm away, and the cowboy let him go. "This is not over," Bernard muttered, but he was already backing away, his bravado crumbling. "Yes, it is," the cowboy said simply, and Bernard turned and walked quickly toward Main Street, disappearing around the corner. The cowboy immediately turned to Clara, and for the first time she saw his face clearly. He had strong features, a straight nose, eyes that were a striking shade of gray-green beneath dark brows, and a mouth that looked like it might smile easily under different circumstances. Right now, his expression was serious, concerned, as he took in the damage Bernard had inflicted. "Are you all right, miss?" he asked, stepping closer but not too close, respecting the space around her. Clara wanted to say yes, wanted to brush off his concern and maintain her independence. But the truth was that her face throbbed with pain, and her hands were shaking with delayed shock. "I will be," she managed, touching her jaw gingerly and wincing. "Thank you for intervening. That was kind of you." "Kindness has nothing to do with it," he said firmly. What he was doing was wrong. He glanced around, then gestured toward the street. "You should see the doctor. That jaw might need attention." "I cannot afford the doctor," Clara said automatically, then felt embarrassed at the admission. She straightened her shoulders despite the pain. "I will be fine. I have taken worse." Something flickered in his eyes at that statement, something dark and angry, though she sensed the anger was not directed at her. "No one should have to take any of it," he said quietly. He reached up and removed his hat, revealing dark brown hair that fell across his forehead. "Vincent Farrell, madam. I am passing through on my way to deliver some horses to a ranch north of here, but I will be in town for a few days at least." "Clara Thornton," she replied, studying him more carefully now. Vincent Farrell looked like so many of the cowboys and drifters who passed through South Pass City, weathered and road-worn, but there was something different about him, a gentleness in how he held himself despite the obvious strength, a directness in his gaze that suggested honesty was important to him. "I appreciate what you did, Mr. Farrell. Most men would not have stopped him." "Then most men are cowards," Vincent said bluntly. He settled his hat back on his head. "May I at least walk you wherever you are going? Make sure Bernard does not decide to come back." Clara hesitated. She was not accustomed to accepting help, had learned early in South Pass City that independence was safer than relying on others, but her jaw hurt badly enough that she was fighting dizziness, and the thought of encountering Bernard again made her stomach clench with fear. "I have a room above the dress shop on Main Street," she said finally. "I work there as a seamstress." "Then let me escort you there," Vincent said, offering his arm with old-fashioned courtesy. Clara took it, grateful for the support, even as she tried not to lean too heavily on him. They walked slowly around the general store and onto Main Street, where the afternoon bustle continued unabated. South Pass City had been built on gold fever, and though the boom days were fading, there were still enough miners and merchants and assorted fortune seekers to keep the town lively. The street was packed with horses and wagons, men in dusty work clothes calling to each other, women in modest dresses hurrying between shops with baskets over their arms. Vincent guided her carefully through the crowd, his presence solid and reassuring beside her. Clara found herself acutely aware of him, the way he moved with practiced ease, the subtle shift of his body to shield her from being jostled by passers-by, the warmth of his arm beneath her hand. She snuck glances at his profile as they walked, noting the straight line of his nose, the slight cleft in his chin, the way his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings as if assessing for threats. "You said you were delivering horses," she ventured, trying to focus on conversation rather than the pain radiating through her face. "Are you a rancher?" "Not exactly," Vincent replied. "I work for a cattle outfit down in Colorado, but I am good with horses, and they trust me to handle special deliveries. These particular animals are breeding stock, expensive enough that they wanted someone reliable to see them safely delivered." He glanced at her. "What about you? How did you end up in South Pass City?" Clara had told this story before, but it never got easier. "My parents died of fever 3 years ago. We had a small farm in Missouri, but after they passed there was nothing to keep me there. I had learned sewing from my mother, and I heard there was work out west, so I came here. Mrs. Henderson, who owns the dress shop, took me on, and I have been here ever since." "Do you like it here?" Vincent asked, and the question seemed genuinely curious rather than merely polite. "I do not know that like is the right word," Clara said slowly, thinking about it. "It is hard, and sometimes dangerous, and often lonely. But I have my work and I can support myself, which is more than many women can say. I have learned to be strong here, to stand on my own feet. That matters to me." "I can see that," Vincent said, and there was approval in his voice. "What you did today, defending that girl, that took real courage." "Or real foolishness," Clara said with a bitter laugh, then winced as the motion hurt her jaw. "I knew Bernard would be angry, but I could not just stand by and watch him hurt her. She was so frightened, and no one else was going to help." "Then you did the right thing," Vincent said firmly. "The world needs more people willing to stand up for others, not fewer." They had reached the dress shop, a tidy building with a large front window displaying examples of Mrs. Henderson's work. The shop occupied the ground floor, with Clara's small room on the second story, accessible by an outside staircase on the side of the building. Vincent helped her to the base of the stairs, then released her arm. "Will you be all right from here?" he asked, looking up at the steep wooden steps with concern. "Yes, thank you," Clara said, though in truth the stairs looked daunting in her current condition. She forced herself to smile. "Thank you again for your help, Mr. Farrell. I hope you have a safe journey when you leave town." Vincent studied her for a long moment, those gray-green eyes seeing perhaps more than she wanted him to. "Would you allow me to check on you tomorrow?" he asked, "just to make sure you are healing properly? I know we are strangers, but I would feel better knowing you are all right." Clara should have said no. She should have thanked him again and sent him on his way, and maintained the careful distance she kept between herself and everyone else in this town. But something in his expression, the genuine concern and the unexpected gentleness from a man who clearly could be dangerous if he chose, made her nod. "I would appreciate that," she heard herself say. "I will be at the shop tomorrow. We open at 9. Then I will come by around 10, if that suits you," Vincent said. He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture of farewell. "Take care of yourself, Miss Thornton." Clara watched him walk back down Main Street, his long-legged stride eating up the distance, before she forced herself to climb the stairs to her room. Each step sent jolts of pain through her head, but she gritted her teeth and kept going until she reached the top and let herself into the small space that had been her home for 3 years. The room was not much, just a bed, a small table with 2 chairs, a dresser, and a washstand, but it was hers. Clara poured water from the pitcher into the basin and soaked a cloth, then held it gingerly to her swollen jaw. The cool water provided some relief, and she sank down onto her bed, suddenly exhausted. She thought about the saloon girl, hoped she had gotten away safely. She thought about Bernard and wondered if he would try to retaliate. And she thought about Vincent Farrell, the cowboy who had appeared like something out of a dime novel to rescue her, and the way her heart had unexpectedly fluttered when he looked at her with those serious gray-green eyes. Clara had not let herself think about men in that way for a long time. When she first arrived in South Pass City, she had quickly learned that most of the men in town saw women as either property or entertainment, with little middle ground. The few who had shown interest in courting her properly had been nice enough, but she had not felt any spark, any connection that made her want to risk her hard-won independence. She had resigned herself to a life alone, focused on her work and her survival. But Vincent Farrell had looked at her like she mattered, had defended her without expecting anything in return, had treated her with a respect that felt revolutionary in its simplicity. It was probably foolish to read anything into a single meeting, especially given that he was just passing through. Clara pressed the cold cloth to her jaw and told herself not to build castles in the air. He had been kind, nothing more. Tomorrow he would check on her out of decency, and then he would leave South Pass City and she would never see him again. That was the sensible, realistic way to think about it. But as Clara finally changed into her nightgown and climbed under her thin blankets despite the heat, she could not quite stop herself from replaying the moment when Vincent had caught Bernard's wrist and said, "Enough," with that quiet authority. The moment when everything had changed. The next morning dawned hot and clear, and Clara woke with her jaw still throbbing, but the swelling somewhat reduced. She examined herself in the small mirror above her dresser and winced at the bruise that had bloomed across her cheek and jaw, purple and yellow and thoroughly ugly. There was no hiding it, so she did not bother trying. She dressed in one of her simpler work dresses, a practical gray cotton that could withstand the inevitable pins and thread and chalk of her profession, and pinned her dark brown hair into a simple bun at the nape of her neck. Mrs. Henderson took one look at Clara when she came down to the shop and immediately bustled over, her round face creased with concern. "Good Lord, child, what happened to you?" she demanded, her hands fluttering around Clara's face without quite touching. Clara told her an edited version of events, leaving out the details about the saloon girl and focusing on the confrontation with Bernard. Mrs. Henderson clicked her tongue disapprovingly. "That man is a menace, and someone should have dealt with him long ago. But I am glad someone stepped in before he did worse. You should have gone straight to Sheriff Morrison." "And said what?" Clara asked wearily. "That I interfered in Bernard's business and he did not appreciate it? The sheriff would have told me I got what I deserved." Mrs. Henderson looked like she wanted to argue, but they both knew Clara was probably right. Sheriff Morrison was competent enough at handling claim disputes and tracking down horse thieves, but he had little interest in protecting women from the consequences of their own actions, as he saw it. Mrs. Henderson sighed heavily. "Well, you take it easy today. No heavy lifting, and if that jaw starts hurting worse, you tell me immediately." Clara agreed and settled into her usual work routine. The shop had 3 orders in progress: a new dress for the bank manager's wife, alterations on a suit for one of the mine owners, and a complete wardrobe for a family that had just arrived from back east. Clara lost herself in the familiar rhythm of measuring and cutting and stitching, her hands steady and sure, even if her thoughts kept drifting to Vincent Farrell and whether he would actually come. At precisely 10 o'clock, the bell above the shop door chimed, and Vincent walked in, removing his hat as he entered. He looked freshly washed, his dark hair still damp, and he had changed into a clean shirt, though his clothes were still clearly those of a working cowboy. His eyes found Clara immediately, and she saw the flash of anger that crossed his face when he took in her bruised jaw in the clear morning light. "How are you feeling?" he asked, crossing to where she stood at the work table. "Better than yesterday," Clara said honestly. "The swelling has gone down some." "But it still hurts," Vincent said, making it a statement rather than a question. His jaw was tight with suppressed emotion. "I should have hit him harder." "You did enough," Clara said quickly. "More than enough. If you had truly hurt him, there would have been trouble. This town does not look kindly on strangers who injure locals, no matter the reason." Vincent looked like he wanted to argue, but he held his tongue, clearly recognizing the truth in her words. "Mrs.?" Henderson approached from the back of the shop, eyeing Vincent with the frank assessment of a woman who had seen plenty of men in her 50 years, and could usually sort the good from the bad within moments. "You must be the gentleman who helped Clara yesterday," she said, her tone reserved but not unfriendly. "I am Margaret Henderson. I own this shop." "Vincent Farrell, madam," Vincent said, offering his hand with respectful courtesy. "I am glad I was nearby when Miss Thornton needed assistance." Mrs. Henderson shook his hand firmly, her eyes narrowing slightly as she studied him. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, because she nodded once, decisively. "Well, Mr. Farrell, I am grateful to you. Clara is a fine worker and a good person, and she did not deserve what Bernard Hutchins did to her." She glanced between them, then added, "Clara, why do not you take a break? It is a lovely morning and some fresh air might do you good. Mr. Farrell, perhaps you would walk with her, make sure she stays safe." Clara felt her cheeks warm slightly at the obvious matchmaking, but Vincent simply nodded. "I would be honored if Miss Thornton is willing." Clara wanted to refuse, to maintain her independence and her careful boundaries, but the truth was that she wanted to talk to Vincent more, wanted to know more about this man who had intervened on her behalf. "A short walk would be nice," she agreed, setting down the dress she had been hemming. They stepped out into the morning sunshine, and Vincent offered his arm again. This time Clara took it with less hesitation, appreciating the solid warmth of him beside her. They walked slowly down Main Street, away from the busiest part of town, past the assay office and the barber shop and the small whitewashed church at the end of the street. "Your employer seems like a good woman," Vincent observed. "She is," Clara said warmly. "When I arrived in South Pass City with almost nothing, she gave me a chance. She taught me the finer points of dressmaking, and she has always treated me fairly. I owe her a great deal." "You have clearly earned her trust and respect," Vincent said. They had reached the edge of town now, where the buildings gave way to scattered houses and then open land, the mountains rising in the distance like ancient sentinels. Vincent guided them to a small bench someone had placed beneath a cottonwood tree, probably for this exact purpose, a shaded spot to rest and enjoy the view. "May we sit for a moment?" Clara nodded, and they settled onto the bench, the dappled shade a welcome relief from the sun. From here they could see much of South Pass City spread out before them, the false-fronted buildings, the maze of tents and shacks where the miners lived, the ribbon of the creek that ran along the southern edge of town. Beyond, the Wind River Range rose up against the brilliant blue sky, still touched with snow on the highest peaks despite the August heat. "It is beautiful country," Vincent said quietly, following her gaze. "Harsh, but beautiful." "That describes most things out here," Clara said. "Nothing comes easy in Wyoming, but that makes the good moments more precious somehow." She looked at him, studying his profile. You said you work on a cattle ranch in Colorado. Do you like that life?" Vincent was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. "I do," he said finally. "I like working with the animals, like being outdoors, like the freedom of it. I have been doing it since I was 16, so it is the only life I really know. But lately I have been feeling restless, like I am supposed to be somewhere else or doing something else. I just do not know what yet." "That must be difficult," Clara said softly, "not knowing what you are searching for." He turned to look at her then, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "Maybe I just found it," he said quietly. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility and the recognition of something neither of them had expected. Clara felt her heart start to beat faster, felt the pull of attraction and something deeper, something that scared her, even as it thrilled her. This was dangerous territory, letting herself feel this way about a man she had known for less than a day, a man who would be leaving soon. "Vincent," she said carefully, using his first name without quite meaning to, "you are just passing through. You will deliver your horses and move on, back to your ranch in Colorado, or wherever the trail takes you. I cannot let myself think about this as anything more than what it is." "And what is it?" Vincent asked, leaning slightly closer. "Tell me you do not feel this connection between us. Tell me I am alone in this." Clara wanted to lie, wanted to protect herself, but she had never been good at dishonesty. "I cannot tell you that," she whispered, "but I also cannot afford to believe in fairy tales. My life is here, my work is here. I have built something for myself in South Pass City, and I will not throw that away for a dream that might disappear tomorrow." "What if it does not disappear?" Vincent said intently. "What if I stayed? What if this is what I have been searching for?" "You do not know me," Clara protested, even as her heart sang at his words. "We met yesterday. This is madness." "Maybe," Vincent agreed, "but sometimes the best things in life are a little bit mad. My parents met on a Monday and were married by Saturday, and they had 30 years together before the influenza took them. When you know, you know." He reached out and gently took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "I am not asking you to marry me tomorrow, or to make any promises you are not ready to make. I am just asking you to let me stay a while longer, to give this a chance. I can find work here, enough to keep me fed and housed while we get to know each other properly. And if it turns out I am wrong, if this feeling fades, then I will leave and no harm done. But if I am right, Clara, if this is real, then walking away now would be the biggest mistake of my life." Clara looked at their joined hands, then up at his face, at the earnest hope and vulnerability in his expression. Every practical instinct she had told her to refuse, to send him away before she got hurt. But there was another voice too, quieter but insistent, that whispered about second chances and happiness and the possibility of not being alone anymore. "All right," she heard herself say, "stay for a while. But Vincent, you need to understand that I will not give up my independence, my work. I have fought too hard for it. If we do this, it has to be as equals." "I would not want it any other way," Vincent said, and the smile that spread across his face transformed him from handsome to beautiful. "Thank you for giving me this chance. I promise you will not regret it." They sat there under the cottonwood tree for another few minutes, hands linked, talking about small things and laughing together, and Clara felt something loosen in her chest that she had not even realized was tight. For the first time in 3 years, she let herself imagine a future that included more than just survival and solitude. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of work and stolen moments together. Vincent found a job at the livery stable, working for old Hiram Cole, who was getting too arthritic to handle all the work himself. It was hard physical labor, caring for the horses that constantly moved through South Pass City, shoeing them and grooming them and mucking out stalls, but Vincent never complained. He would finish his work, wash up at the pump behind the stable, and then come to walk Clara home in the evenings when the shop closed. They fell into an easy rhythm together, comfortable in ways that seemed to defy the short time they had known each other. Vincent would tell her stories about his life on the trail, about the cattle drives and the vast open spaces of Colorado, about growing up the middle child of 5 on a hardscrabble farm in Kansas before his parents died and he struck out on his own. Clara shared her own stories, about her quiet childhood in Missouri, about the dreams her mother had harbored for her, about the terrifying journey west and the countless small struggles that had shaped her into the woman she was now. They talked about everything and nothing, their conversations ranging from philosophical debates about the rights of women and the changing face of the West, to silly arguments about whether apple pie or cherry pie was superior. Vincent made her laugh in ways she had not laughed in years, and Clara found herself looking forward to the end of each workday with an anticipation that felt almost giddy. The town noticed, of course. South Pass City was too small for a developing courtship to go unnoticed, especially one involving a newcomer and a woman who had kept herself carefully apart from such entanglements. Mrs. Henderson watched them with pleased approval, clearly delighted that Clara had found someone. Others were more skeptical or gossipy, and Clara heard whispers when she walked past certain groups of women, speculation about her intentions and Vincent's character. Bernard Hutchins remained a problem. He glowered at Clara whenever their paths crossed, and she caught him watching her more than once with an expression that made her skin crawl. Vincent noticed too, and she could see the tension in his shoulders whenever Bernard was nearby. But Bernard was smart enough, or cowardly enough, not to try anything while Vincent was around. It was nearly 3 weeks after their first meeting when things came to a head. Clara was walking home from the shop later than usual, having stayed to finish an urgent order for Mrs. Henderson. Vincent had been held up at the stable with a difficult horse, and Clara had assured him she would be fine walking the short distance alone. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and Main Street was still relatively busy. But when Clara took the outside stairs up to her room, Bernard was waiting at the top, leaning against her door with his arms crossed. "We have unfinished business, you and I," he said, his voice low and threatening. Clara froze on the stairs, her hand gripping the railing. Her mind raced, calculating her options. She could scream, but would anyone come? She could run back down the stairs, but Bernard was faster and bigger. She could try to talk her way out of this, but she doubted Bernard was interested in conversation. "There is nothing between us, Bernard," she said as calmly as she could manage. "What happened happened. Let it go." "Let it go?" Bernard laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You humiliated me, made me look weak in front of that cowboy, and then you paraded around town with him like you were somebody special. You need to be taught your place, Clara Thornton, and this time there will not be anyone to save you." He took a step down toward her, and Clara retreated, her heart hammering. But before Bernard could reach her, Vincent appeared at the bottom of the stairs, moving with a speed that seemed impossible. "Step away from her," Vincent said, and his voice was cold and hard, nothing like the gentle tone he used with Clara. His hand rested on his gun, not drawing it, but making the threat clear. Bernard stopped, his face flushing with anger and fear. "This does not concern you, Farrell. This is between me and her." "Everything concerning Clara concerns me," Vincent said flatly. "And you are done threatening her. You are done even looking at her. If I ever, and I mean ever, catch you near her again, I will not be so restrained as I was last time. Do you understand me?" There was something in Vincent's eyes then, something dangerous and absolutely serious. And even Bernard seemed to recognize that pushing further would be a terrible mistake. He held up his hands in a mockery of surrender. "Fine. The woman is not worth the trouble anyway." He pushed past Vincent roughly, nearly knocking him aside, and stalked off down the street. Vincent waited until Bernard was out of sight, then climbed the stairs 2 at a time to reach Clara. "Are you all right? Did he hurt you?" "No," Clara managed, though she was shaking. "He was just trying to scare me. Thank you for coming when you did." "How did you know?" "I did not. I finished at the stable and was coming to meet you, and I saw him heading toward the stairs with that look on his face." Vincent's jaw was tight with suppressed fury. "Clara, this cannot continue. He is not going to stop." "What am I supposed to do?" Clara asked, frustration and fear making her voice sharp. "Go to the sheriff who will not help? Leave town and abandon everything I have built here? I will not let Bernard Hutchins drive me away." "Then let me handle it," Vincent said. "Let me make it clear to him, in ways he will understand, that touching you means answering to me." "And risk you being arrested or killed?" Clara shook her head vehemently. "No, I will not let you endanger yourself for me." "Clara," Vincent said, taking her hands in his, "do you not understand yet? You are worth any risk." "Ow." He stopped himself, but Clara heard what he had almost said. "Do not," she whispered. "Do not say it, not yet. Not like this." Vincent studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but I am going to talk to Sheriff Morrison tomorrow, make an official complaint about Bernard harassing you, and I am going to make sure people know that you are under my protection. Maybe that will be enough to make him back off." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to insist she did not need protection, but the truth was that she was scared and tired of being scared. So she nodded, letting herself lean against Vincent's solid warmth. "All right, but please be careful. I do not want to lose you." "You will not," Vincent promised, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I am not going anywhere." True to his word, Vincent went to see Sheriff Morrison the next morning. The sheriff was unimpressed with the complaint, as Clara had predicted, but Vincent persisted until Morrison agreed to at least speak to Bernard about leaving Clara alone. It was not much, but it was something. More effective was the conversation Vincent had with several of the more respected men in town, including the bank manager and the owners of the two largest general stores. Vincent explained the situation calmly and factually, emphasizing that Bernard had attacked Clara unprovoked when she was defending another woman, and that Bernard was now making ongoing threats. These men had wives and daughters of their own, and the idea of a man like Bernard terrorizing women did not sit well with them. Word spread quickly, and Bernard found himself suddenly unwelcome in several establishments, and on the receiving end of disapproving stares. The social pressure worked where official channels had failed. Bernard left town 3 days later, heading south toward the Colorado border, according to the stable hands who prepared his horse. Clara felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she had not even fully acknowledged she was carrying. With Bernard gone, Clara and Vincent's relationship deepened in ways both thrilling and terrifying. They spent every evening together, walking along the creek or sitting in the small parlor of the boarding house where Vincent had taken a room. They talked for hours, learning the landscapes of each other's souls, discovering shared values and complementary differences. Vincent was patient and gentle, never pushing for more than Clara was ready to give, but the attraction between them was impossible to ignore. When he kissed her for the first time, a month after they met, it was under the cottonwood tree where they had first truly talked. His lips were soft against hers, questioning rather than demanding, and Clara felt herself melt into him with a completeness that was both wonderful and frightening. "I love you," Vincent said when they finally broke apart, his forehead resting against hers. "I know it is too soon and too fast, but I cannot keep it inside anymore. I love you, Clara Thornton." Clara felt tears prick her eyes, happy tears for once. "I love you too," she whispered back. "I have loved you almost from the beginning, even though I tried not to." They held each other as the sun set over the mountains, and Clara felt a sense of rightness settle into her bones. This was real. This was happening. She was in love with a cowboy who had stopped a blow meant for her and said, "Enough." And somehow that simple act of decency had changed both their lives forever. 2 months after they met, on a crisp October evening, with the aspens turning gold on the mountainsides, Vincent asked Clara to marry him. They were at their cottonwood tree again, and he got down on one knee in the fallen leaves with a simple gold band he had bought from the jeweler on Main Street. "I know I do not have much to offer you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I am just a stable hand with a little money saved and a horse to my name, but I promise you that I will work hard every day of my life to give you the future you deserve. I promise to respect your independence and support your dreams. I promise to stand beside you, not in front of or behind you, and I promise to love you until my last breath and beyond. Clara Thornton, will you marry me?" Clara looked at this man who had become her whole world, who made her laugh and challenged her mind and held her heart with gentle reverence. She thought about the life she had built alone, the careful independence she had fought for, and realized that sharing it with Vincent would not diminish it, but expand it. Two people standing together, supporting each other, could be so much stronger than one person standing alone. "Yes," she said, pulling him to his feet so she could kiss him properly. "Yes, Vincent Farrell, I will marry you." They were married 3 weeks later, in the little whitewashed church at the end of Main Street, on a sunny November morning, with the first snow of winter threatening and the gray clouds gathering over the mountains. Mrs. Henderson stood as Clara's witness, and Hiram Cole stood for Vincent. Clara wore a dress she had made herself, dove gray silk with cream lace at the collar and cuffs, and she carried a small bouquet of dried wildflowers that Vincent had collected and preserved for her. The ceremony was simple and brief, but when Reverend Walsh pronounced them husband and wife and Vincent kissed her, Clara felt like she was floating. The small congregation of friends and well-wishers cheered, and Mrs. Henderson dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. They had a modest reception at the boarding house, with food donated by various friends and a fiddle player providing music. Clara danced with her new husband, whirling around the small parlor, and she could not remember ever being this happy. Vincent looked at her like she hung the moon, and Clara felt beautiful and cherished in ways she had never experienced before. That night, in the small house they had rented on the outskirts of town, Vincent carried Clara over the threshold with such tender ceremony that she laughed and cried at the same time. He made love to her with patient gentleness, learning her body as thoroughly as he had learned her mind and soul, and Clara discovered new dimensions of intimacy and pleasure she had only vaguely imagined. Afterward, lying in the darkness with Vincent's arms around her and his heartbeat steady beneath her ear, Clara felt a peace she had not known in years. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" Vincent asked, his voice drowsy and content. "For stopping that blow, for saying enough, for seeing me when so many others looked right through me, for loving me." Clara pressed a kiss to his chest. "For everything." "You do not have to thank me for loving you," Vincent said, tightening his arms around her. "Loving you is the easiest thing I have ever done. You are extraordinary, Clara Farrell, and I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you know it." Clara smiled against his skin, savoring the sound of her new name, Clara Farrell. It would take some getting used to, but she liked it. She liked the way it connected her to this good man, the way it signified a new chapter in her life while not erasing who she had been before. The first year of their marriage was not without challenges. Money was tight, with Vincent's modest income from the stable and Clara's earnings from the dress shop stretched to cover rent and food and all the small expenses of setting up a household. They learned how to live together, how to navigate the small irritations and adjustments that came with sharing space in life with another person. They had their first fight 3 months after the wedding, about something so trivial Clara could not even remember what it was later. But the making up was sweet, and they both learned that disagreement did not mean disaster. Clara continued to work at the dress shop, refusing Vincent's initial suggestion that she might want to stay home. "I told you before we married that I would not give up my work," she reminded him firmly. "It matters to me. I am good at it, and it is mine." "You are right," Vincent said, holding up his hands in surrender. "I am sorry. I should not have suggested otherwise. I just worry about you working so hard." "Then help me," Clara said simply. "We are partners, are we not? Help with the cooking and the washing so I have energy for the sewing, and let me worry about whether I am working too hard." Vincent took the criticism to heart, and they developed a routine that worked for both of them. He would rise early to start his work at the stable, and Clara would follow an hour later to open the shop. In the evenings, they would prepare dinner together, then spend the quiet hours talking or reading, or simply enjoying each other's presence. On Sundays, they would ride out into the mountains on Vincent's horse, Clara seated behind him with her arms around his waist, exploring the wild country and marveling at the beauty of Wyoming. It was during one of these Sunday rides, in late summer of their first year of marriage, that Clara told Vincent she was pregnant. They had stopped beside a rushing stream to let the horse drink, and Clara had been trying to find the right words for the past hour. "Vincent," she said finally, taking his hand, "I have news. I am with child." Vincent's face went through a rapid series of expressions, shock and disbelief, and then pure joy. "Truly? You are certain?" "As certain as I can be," Clara said, smiling at his reaction. "The doctor confirmed it yesterday. He thinks the baby will come in February." Vincent let out a whoop of delight and picked Clara up, spinning her around before remembering himself and setting her down carefully. Sorry, I should not be so rough. Are you feeling all right? Do you need to sit down? Should we go home?" "Vincent, I am pregnant, not made of glass," Clara said with a laugh. "I feel fine, just tired sometimes. And yes, we should probably head back, but only because it will be dark soon." The ride back to South Pass City was filled with Vincent's excited plans and questions. He wanted to know what they should name the baby, whether they thought it would be a boy or girl, how they should prepare the small second bedroom in their house. Clara answered as best she could, amused and touched by his enthusiasm. "I just hope I can be a good father," Vincent said as they approached town, his voice turning more serious. "I want our children to grow up feeling loved and safe." "You will be wonderful," Clara assured him. "You are kind and patient and strong. Our children will be lucky to have you." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall and into the winter. Clara's belly swelled, and she had to alter her dresses to accommodate her changing shape. Mrs. Henderson was delighted with the news and insisted on making tiny garments for the baby, her skilled fingers creating impossibly small gowns and blankets. Vincent became almost comically protective, fretting if Clara so much as lifted a basket of sewing supplies and insisting she sit down frequently. Clara tolerated the hovering with amused patience, understanding that it came from love and worry. She had her own fears about childbirth, having heard too many stories of women who did not survive it, but she tried to stay positive and focus on the joy of bringing a new life into the world. On a bitterly cold night in late February of 1878, Clara went into labor. The pains started just after sunset, and Vincent immediately ran to fetch the midwife, a competent woman named Ruth, who had delivered half the babies in South Pass City. Ruth took one look at Clara and shooed Vincent out of the bedroom, telling him to boil water and stay out of the way. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Clara had never experienced pain like this, waves of agony that seemed like they would split her apart, but Ruth coached her through it with firm encouragement. Vincent paced outside the bedroom door, listening to Clara's cries and feeling utterly helpless. Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, Clara gave one last tremendous push and felt the baby slip free. A moment of silence, terrifying in its completeness, and then a thin wail split the air. Clara collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted beyond measure, and Ruth laughed. "You have a son," the midwife announced, holding up the squalling red infant. "A big, healthy boy with a good, strong voice." Clara started crying, relief and joy overwhelming her, and she held out her arms for her son. Ruth placed the baby on her chest, and Clara stared down at the tiny wrinkled face in wonder. He was perfect, absolutely perfect, from his shock of dark hair to his tiny fists waving in protest at being thrust into the cold world. The door burst open and Vincent rushed in, his face pale and drawn with worry. "Clara, are you all right? I heard the baby crying." "We are fine," Clara said, smiling up at him through her tears. "Come meet your son." Vincent approached the bed slowly, reverently, his eyes fixed on the small bundle in Clara's arms. When he reached them, he sank down on the edge of the bed and gently touched the baby's tiny hand with one calloused finger. The infant immediately grasped it, wrapping his whole fist around Vincent's fingertip, and Vincent's face crumpled with emotion. "He is perfect," Vincent whispered. "Clara, you did such an amazing job. I am so proud of you." "We did it together," Clara said. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months but never settled on one definitively. Now, looking at their son's face, the name came to Clara suddenly. "What about James Michael Farrell, after your father and mine?" "James," Vincent repeated, testing the sound. "I like it. James Michael Farrell. Welcome to the world, son." Little James proved to be a relatively easy baby, sleeping well and eating eagerly, and only fussing when he was genuinely uncomfortable. Clara stayed home from the shop for 6 weeks to recover and establish nursing, and Mrs. Henderson brought over meals and gifts and endless advice. When Clara finally returned to work part-time, she brought James with her in a basket, and the baby became the shop's unofficial mascot. Vincent was a devoted father, coming home from the stable each evening eager to hold his son and play with him. He would walk James around their small house, pointing out objects and talking to him in a gentle running commentary that made Clara smile. At night, when James woke crying, Vincent would often be the one to get up and bring the baby to Clara for feeding, then walk him back to sleep afterward. The next few years passed in a blur of hard work and domestic happiness. Clara and Vincent saved every penny they could, dreaming of eventually buying their own land and starting a small ranch. Vincent took on extra work when he could find it, breaking horses for local ranchers or doing construction jobs. Clara expanded her sewing business, taking on more complex orders and building a reputation for quality work. James grew into a bright, energetic toddler with his father's gray-green eyes and his mother's dark hair. He learned to walk at 10 months and immediately began getting into everything, keeping Clara constantly on her toes. Vincent built him a small rocking horse and taught him the names of all the animals at the stable, and James would toddle along beside his father, chattering about horsies and kitties and doggies. When James was 2.5, Clara discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the first, with nausea that lasted well into the second trimester and persistent exhaustion. But they were older and more experienced now, and they weathered it together. Their second child, a daughter they named Sarah Ann, was born in October of 1880. Unlike her brother's difficult entry into the world, Sarah's birth was relatively quick and easy, and she emerged with a shock of red gold hair that came from neither parent, but must have been inherited from some distant ancestor. She was smaller than James had been, more delicate, but she had a fierce temperament that made itself known from the first day. James was initially uncertain about this new addition to the family, but Vincent sat him down and explained that Sarah was his baby sister, and he was going to be her big brother and protector. James took this responsibility seriously, and soon he was following Clara around, asking if he could help with Sarah, patting her head gently and bringing her his favorite toys. With 2 children and 2 incomes, the little house on the outskirts of town was becoming cramped. Clara and Vincent had been saving for years, but land prices around South Pass City had risen as the town grew, and they still did not have quite enough for the ranch they wanted. Then fate intervened in an unexpected way. Hiram Cole, who had employed Vincent for nearly 5 years, decided to retire and move to Denver to live with his daughter. He offered Vincent the chance to buy the livery stable at a fair price, with generous terms for payment. It was not the ranch they had dreamed of, but it was a business and a property they could own. Clara and Vincent discussed it long into the night. A livery stable would provide steady income, and a skill they could teach their children. It would root them even more firmly in South Pass City, which had become their home, and they could still save toward a ranch in the future if they wanted. "What do you think?" Vincent asked Clara, seeking her input as he always did. "It is a big decision, and it affects all of us." "I think we should do it," Clara said slowly. "I think we have been given an opportunity we should not pass up. We can make this work, Vincent, together." So, they bought the livery stable, taking on debt for the first time in their lives, but also gaining an asset and a business. Vincent threw himself into making improvements, expanding the stables and building a better system for hay storage. Clara continued her sewing, but also helped with the business side of the stable, keeping the books and managing customer relations. The work was exhausting, especially with 2 young children, but it was also satisfying in ways they had not anticipated. They were building something together, creating a legacy for James and Sarah. And South Pass City itself was changing, becoming less wild and more settled, with better schools and churches and civic organizations. When James turned 6, they enrolled him in the town's school, where a young teacher from Pennsylvania taught reading and arithmetic and history to a mixed group of children. James thrived there, showing a quick mind and a love of learning that delighted both his parents. Sarah, now 3, was showing signs of inheriting her mother's creativity, constantly drawing pictures and making up elaborate stories about the world around her. Life was not perfect. There were still struggles, months when money was tight and customers were scarce, illnesses that swept through the family, leaving everyone miserable, the constant worry about whether they were raising their children right. But through it all, Clara and Vincent held fast to each other and to the love that had brought them together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Vincent closed the stable for the day and took Clara back to the cottonwood tree where he had proposed. The tree was bigger now, its trunk thicker and its canopy wider, but it was still their special place. They sat on the bench, which had weathered a decade of sun and snow and wind, and looked out over the town that had become their home. "Do you ever regret it?" Vincent asked, taking Clara's hand in his. "Marrying me, I mean. You could have had a simpler life, stayed independent, not had all the complications that come with a husband and children." "Never," Clara said firmly, squeezing his hand. "You gave me a life I did not even know I wanted. You gave me love and partnership and family. You saw me, Vincent, really saw me, when so many others looked right through me. That day you stopped Bernard from hitting me. When you said enough, you were not just stopping him. You were stopping all the years of being invisible and unvalued. You made me feel like I mattered." "You always mattered," Vincent said softly. "You always will. I love you, Clara, just as much now as the day we married, maybe more." "I love you too," Clara said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for the life we have built together, for being my partner in all things, for loving our children with such devotion, for being exactly who you are. They sat there until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, and Clara felt a deep contentment settle over her. The years ahead would bring their own challenges and changes, but she would face them with Vincent beside her, and that made all the difference. The children grew, and the business prospered. James, at 16, was tall and strong like his father, and he had begun working full-time at the stable, learning every aspect of the business. He had his father's way with horses and his mother's head for numbers, and Vincent often said that the stable would be in good hands when James eventually took it over. Sarah, at 13, was showing remarkable artistic talent. Clara had taught her to sew, but Sarah was more interested in designing than stitching, filling notebooks with sketches of dresses and houses and landscapes. Clara encouraged this creativity, even as she made sure Sarah learned the practical skills she would need to support herself, if necessary. In the spring of 1891, when Clara was 37 and Vincent 40, they welcomed a surprise third child. They had assumed their family was complete, but life had other plans. This baby, another boy they named Thomas Vincent Farrell, was born in a thunderstorm in April, entering the world with the same dramatic flair that characterized his birth timing. James and Sarah were old enough to be genuinely helpful with the new baby, and Thomas became the darling of the whole family. Where James had been serious and Sarah artistic, Thomas was pure sunshine, laughing at everything and charming everyone he met. Vincent joked that they had finally gotten an easy child now that they were too old to properly appreciate it. But Clara did appreciate it, perhaps more than she would have at 22. She was older and wiser now, more confident in her parenting and less frightened of making mistakes. She treasured every moment with Thomas, knowing how quickly childhood passed. Vincent was the same, spending hours playing with their youngest son and marveling at every small milestone. The years continued their steady march. James married a sweet-natured girl named Elizabeth from a nearby ranch, and they gave Clara and Vincent their first grandchild, a granddaughter named Hope, in 1894. Sarah went to Denver to study at a school of design, the first member of either family to pursue formal education beyond basic schooling, and she thrived there, eventually opening her own dressmaking shop that catered to wealthy clients. Thomas grew up surrounded by horses and love, and he combined the best traits of both his older siblings, James's practicality and Sarah's creativity. He talked about becoming a veterinarian, treating sick and injured animals, and Clara and Vincent encouraged him to pursue that dream. As Clara and Vincent entered their 50s, they began to slow down, to appreciate the quieter moments. They hired help to run the stable, giving themselves more time to spend with their grandchildren and each other. On warm evenings, they would sit on the porch of the house they had expanded over the years, watching the sun set over the mountains and reminiscing about their life together. "Do you remember the day we met?" Clara asked one evening, her hand in Vincent's as it had been countless times over their decades together. "When you stopped Bernard from hitting me?" "I remember every moment of that day," Vincent said. "I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever seen, standing up for that girl even knowing what it would cost you. I remember the way my heart stopped when I saw him about to hit you again. And I remember knowing, absolutely knowing in that moment, that you were going to change my life forever. You changed mine too," Clara said softly. "You showed me that I did not have to be alone, that accepting help and love did not mean giving up my strength. You have been my partner and my best friend and the love of my life for over 30 years now, Vincent Farrell, and I would not change a single moment of it." "Not even the hard parts?" Vincent asked with a gentle smile. "Especially not the hard parts," Clara said. "Those made us stronger. They taught us how to lean on each other and fight for each other and never give up. The hard parts made the good parts even sweeter." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. From inside the house, they could hear Thomas practicing his reading aloud, stumbling over the bigger words, but persisting with determination. The sound of their son's voice, the warmth of Vincent's hand in hers, the peace of this quiet evening, all of it combined into a moment of perfect contentment. Clara thought about the young woman she had been, newly arrived in South Pass City, with nothing but determination and a skill with a needle. She thought about the day Bernard had beaten her for defending another woman and how terrified she had been. And she thought about the cowboy who had stopped that next blow and said, "Enough," changing the course of both their lives with that single word. She had been so afraid of losing her independence, of giving up the hard-won strength she had built in herself. But Vincent had taught her that true strength was not about standing alone, it was about knowing when to stand with someone. It was about building something together that was greater than the sum of its parts. It was about love and trust and partnership. Now in her 50s, Clara understood what she had not known at 22. Independence was not diminished by love, it was enhanced by it. She was still herself, still the strong, determined woman who had defended a frightened girl in an alley. But she was also Vincent's wife, James and Sarah and Thomas's mother, Hope's grandmother, a business owner, a valued member of the South Pass City community. All these roles fit together, none diminishing the others. "What are you thinking about?" Vincent asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "Everything," Clara said. "Our whole life together. How grateful I am for all of it. How blessed I have been to share this journey with you." "The blessing has been mine," Vincent said, bringing her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. "You are the greatest gift I have ever received, Clara. The greatest adventure I have ever had. And I would stop 1,000 blows to have this life with you." Clara smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing, the familiar warmth of his body beside hers. They had built a good life here in South Pass City, full of love and laughter and hard-won victories. They had raised children who were kind and capable, had created a business that served their community, had been partners in the truest sense of the word. The moon rose over the mountains, silvering the landscape, and Clara closed her eyes, memorizing this moment. This was what happiness looked like, she thought. Not perfection, but connection. Not ease, but partnership. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of love strong enough to weather any storm. Years continued to pass, bringing changes both expected and surprising. James took over full ownership of the stable when Vincent turned 60, though Vincent still came by most days to help out and visit with the horses. Elizabeth and James had 3 more children, filling the expanded stable house with noise and laughter. Sarah married a fellow artist she met in Denver, and they moved back to South Pass City to be near family, opening a studio together that became a gathering place for the town's small but growing community of creative people. Thomas, true to his childhood dream, went to veterinary school in Cheyenne and returned to South Pass City to establish a practice. He was the first official veterinarian the town had ever had, and his services were in constant demand. He married a schoolteacher named Abigail, and they settled into a house just down the street from Clara and Vincent. Clara and Vincent became the patriarch and matriarch of a sprawling family, presiding over Sunday dinners that filled their house to bursting with children and grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. Clara still sewed occasionally, making clothes for the smallest family members, her fingers still nimble despite the arthritis that made the work slower. Vincent still worked with horses when his body allowed it, unable to fully give up the work that had defined so much of his life. They grew old together, their hair going gray and then white, their bodies becoming slower and stiffer, but their love remaining as strong as ever. They held hands through illnesses and losses, through the deaths of old friends and the celebrations of new births. They were fixtures in South Pass City, respected and beloved, the couple who had arrived as strangers and become essential threads in the town's fabric. On a warm June evening in 1910, 34 years after the day they met, Vincent and Clara sat on their porch as the sun set. Vincent was 74 now, Clara 66, and they both felt every year in their bones, but they were together, and that made everything bearable. "Tell me a story," Clara said, as she often did these days. Her memory was not quite as sharp as it once was, and she loved hearing Vincent recount their shared history. "What story do you want to hear?" Vincent asked, his voice rougher with age but still warm. "Tell me about the day we met," Clara said. "About how you stopped that blow and said enough." Vincent smiled, the expression creating familiar crinkles around his eyes. "I was delivering horses," he began, and Clara closed her eyes, listening to the beloved sound of his voice spinning their story. He told it well, with all the details she remembered and some she had forgotten, painting a picture of 2 young people who found each other in the most unlikely circumstances. When he finished, Clara opened her eyes and looked at her husband, this man who had been her partner and her love for more than 3 decades. "I love you, Vincent Farrell," she said. "Thank you for a beautiful life." "I love you too, Clara Farrell," Vincent replied, squeezing her hand gently. "Thank you for saying yes all those years ago. Thank you for taking a chance on a cowboy with nothing but a horse and a heart full of love." They sat together as the stars came out, comfortable in the silence of long familiarity. Their children were settled, their grandchildren were thriving, their great-grandchildren were beginning to arrive. The life they had built together would continue after they were gone, rippling out through generations in ways they could not fully imagine. Clara thought about that frightened seamstress who had defended a saloon girl she did not even know, who had stood up against a bigger, stronger man because it was the right thing to do. She thought about the cowboy who had intervened when he could have walked past, who had seen something worth protecting and acted without hesitation. And she thought about how one moment of courage on both their parts had led to this, to a lifetime of love and family and purpose. The world had changed dramatically since 1876. South Pass City was no longer a rough mining town, but a proper community with paved streets and electric lights. Wyoming was a state now, and women could vote, a development Clara had celebrated with fierce joy. Automobiles were becoming more common, though Clara preferred horses. The Wild West of her youth was fading into history, becoming legend and myth. But love, Clara thought, love remained constant. Love was what endured when everything else changed. Love was what made all the struggle and sacrifice worthwhile. Love was what she and Vincent had built their life upon, and it had proven to be the strongest foundation possible. "It has been a good life," Vincent said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "The best life," Clara agreed. "I would not change a thing." They sat together as night fell completely. Two people who had started as strangers and become so intertwined that it was impossible to imagine one without the other. Their story had started with violence and intervention, with a cowboy stopping a blow and saying, "Enough." But it had become so much more. It had become a testament to the power of love to transform and heal, to build and create, to endure through decades and across generations. And when Clara finally closed her eyes for the last time, years later, at the age of 79, surrounded by the family she and Vincent had created, her last conscious thought was of that moment under the cottonwood tree when Vincent had asked her to marry him. She had said yes to a life she could not fully imagine, had taken a leap of faith with a man she barely knew, and that choice had given her everything that mattered, everything that made life worth living, a love that lasted, a family that thrived, and a legacy that would continue long after she was gone. Vincent followed her 6 months later, his heart finally giving out after 79 years of faithful service. Their children buried them side by side in the cemetery overlooking South Pass City, under the mountains they had both loved. The headstone was simple, just their names and dates and a single line that James had chosen, "Together always." And they were together, in memory and in the lives they had touched, in the family they had built and the love they had shared. The cowboy and the seamstress, brought together by violence but united by courage and compassion, had created something beautiful and lasting. Their story became part of the history of South Pass City, told and retold to new generations, a reminder that sometimes the most important thing you can do is stop a blow and say, "Enough," because you never know how that single act of decency might change the world.